and welcome to the very first devotion in this 90-day devotion that we're going to be doing. And we're using the book Seasons, Thriving Through All Life's Seasons. And you can get the book on Amazon, on Kindle. And if you cannot afford it, you can send me $1 through PayPal and I'll send you a PDF copy. How's that? But I was wondering, because I mentioned to you in the introduction, which you can find up in the eye here, that this devotional is not meant to be read in order. You can skip and choose. If you miss a few days, that's perfectly okay. But how are you as YouTubers going to know what you have seen and haven't seen? Here's an idea. Because I am not monetized yet, the likes are not super important to me, although they're nice, but you could use hitting that blue like until it turns like that thumbs up, so then you can see what you've watched and what you haven't watched. Anyhow, that's just an idea. So we're going to begin at the beginning, and as I said, not in any particular order. I'm going to be going cover to cover, but you don't have to do that. But we begin in the new year, and this is called New Life in the New Year. New Year's Eve found me on the highway with a group of friends heading toward a cabin at Pigeon Lake, Alberta, about an hour and a half outside my city. The winds began to blow earlier in the afternoon, sweeping the warming effects of El Nino away and returning us to seasonal chilly norms. Although none of us had been to that lake before, we had received clear directions. As seasoned winter travelers, we were confident we would reach our friend's cabin with no difficulty. Worship music blared, and we enjoyed each other's company and anticipated the fun that lay ahead. Unfortunately, we were enjoying ourselves so much that we did not realize we missed our turnoff until we were well past the exit. Our driver made the decision to stay on the same road, believing it would eventually intersect the road we should have taken. My gut kept saying, "Turn back and ask for help," but I didn't speak up. Finally, we came to the next town along the way and phoned our host. Yes, this was in the day before most of us had cell phones. He confirmed that, yes, we had missed our turn, and yes, the only turnoff was 15 miles behind us. The wind changed direction, bringing with it a fine blowing snow. Our driver became a little nervous, and I began to pray, asking the Lord to clear our path and guide our way. The blowing snow made it difficult to keep the car in the right lane. We turned down the music as we prayed. After a harrowing trip, we arrived at the cabin an hour later. As we pulled into the driveway, the storm died down. If we had not made the error in judgment, we would have missed the storm completely. But the Lord was faithful in protecting us even in our foolishness. Our anxious hosts greeted us and ushered us into a cozy living room. When we settled around the fire, we introduced ourselves to another guest who had arrived earlier. Tony soon endeared himself to us with his wit and compassion, and we felt that we had made a great new friend. We shared a wonderful meal, feasting on fellowship and good food. Prayer intermingled our conversation naturally as we waited for a carload of friends who hadn't yet arrived. Once everyone had found their way to the cabin, we entertained ourselves by telling each other stories about what God was doing in our lives. Tony looked on with interest, and as the evening progressed, it became pretty apparent he had not yet become a committed Christian. Just before midnight, we gathered around the wood stove in the living room. Someone asked if we were going to watch the ball drop in Times Square. Someone else suggested that we bring in the new year with prayer and worship. We put on some worship CDs and sang in the new year. As the music played on, we entered into deep worship. People were dancing, singing, kneeling, and quietly worshiping. I glanced over at Tony and saw tears running down his cheeks. He was deeply touched. We slowly became quiet in the stillness of the Lord's presence among us, and Tony went outside for a cigarette and to compose himself. When he returned, I asked if we could pray with him, and he agreed, and we all gathered around him. As we prayed, God made his love evident to Tony. He began to sob, and I could feel God's love saturating him. He met the God who made his heart clean as the sparkling white snow that had continued to fall during the night. We continued to pray for each other, and when we finally went to bed, it was 4:30 a.m. I asked Tony at breakfast how did he feel, and he said it was the strangest and most wonderful New Year's Eve he had ever spent. He laughed as he admitted it was the first time in many years he hadn't woken up with a hangover on New Year's Day. We had an impromptu worship time just before we all headed back to the city, and God touched Tony again. Tony came to our church for a few months before his life led him away from our city, but I haven't forgotten him or the miracle of his new birth. When I was reading this devotion, which I hadn't read for a long time, I wrote the book, yes, but it doesn't mean I read it every day. I thought of this passage in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 1. Let love of the brethren continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. There's many Bible passages that deal with the subject of hospitality and the importance of being hospitable and opening our doors to other people. There's something that happens in a home. There's some extension of love and grace that makes people who might never darken a church feel safe. And this story is no exception. Tony was a roommate of two young men who went to my church. These two young men happened to both suffer with mental illnesses, and yet they did not allow their perceived weaknesses to stop them or be used as an excuse for them not to be hospitable. They did everything in their strength and their power to make our time with them loving and fulfilling and special. They cooked us a really nice meal. They made sure we were all comfortable on that cold winter night. And I know that their hospitality spoke to Tony because Tony lived with these guys back in the city. He knew how they struggled. Tony was touched not only by us worshiping God and the worship music and our prayer for each other. I believe Tony was immensely touched by the hospitality and graciousness shown by his roommates to 8 people who stormed their cabin on a New Year's Eve. So if you are feeling that what you have to offer others isn't enough and it's not perfect, and therefore you're not inviting other people into your world, may I suggest that you follow these 2 young men's example and use what God has given you to bless others.